going to introduce Michael Masucci. Michael is an award-winning video, stage, and multimedia producer, director, and artist. Throughout his full-time career, Michael has also curated and produced hundreds of exhibitions, live performances, lectures, and film and video screenings, and has presented his work at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles and the Centre Pompidou in Paris, France. Welcome, Michael. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Or should I say Dr. Natasha Vita-More, a hyphenate, a hybrid intellectual. Today I'm going to tell a few stories, but I'm going to begin with using you, Natasha, as an exemplar of what I believe a humanity, a transhumanist vision, and a future post-crisis can look like. For me, great scientists are also artists, and great artists are also scientists. And I know that may not be literally true, but I do believe it's figuratively true in that the soul of an artist and the mind of a scientist together can do great things. It can create the Eiffel Tower. It can create the space station. It can create all of the innovations in augmentation that are being discussed in this conference. And as Ryan just said, those augmentations are not new. They really speak to the history and the prehistory of our species. For me, we have been augmented the first time we used fire, the first time there was a stone axe, the first time there was clothing, the first time there was shoes. Yes, anything other than what we are born with is an augmentation and hopefully an enhancement. And as Ryan also said, some of the early augmentations of this modern evolution really are happening in the artists, in the aesthetics, body modification, implantation of bioluminescence. Those are arts-based practices. Always working, of course, with the techniques and the knowledge of science. When I first met Natasha, she was an artist who became a scientist. There are no doubt scientists among you who have become artists, and there are perhaps some of you who always were the two simultaneously. To me, I believe more and more of a dialogue needs to happen on an ongoing basis, and ultimately, we need to begin to craft projects that are both at their core scientific as well as artistic. I believe that any well-funded project should at its core have both a scientist and an artist. As co-leaders, dealing with different things and certainly having different goals, but every project of any substance should have ancillaries that are both technological as well as aesthetic. There's an amazing project by a man named Sugati Mitra, University of Newcastle, who many of you may know about his project, Hole in the Wall. What Mitra did while in India, he punched holes in walls in very, very impoverished neighborhoods, and he put functioning computers there and left them without instructions or even without announcement. And then the next morning, impoverished children, illiterate often, would discover these computers, and amazing things came to be. One, they taught themselves how to use the computers. Now, no doubt the graphical user interface, that amazing hybridization of art and science, helped give them clues as to how to navigate, gave them clues as to how to discover, how to browse, how to search. Mitra first saw this and said, oh, perhaps some of my local computer science students have been helping them. So he did another experiment where he put another hole in the wall in a town nowhere near any computer science course or university, and again, set it up operationally, and the same thing happened. And another remarkable thing happened. These children who spoke only their native Indian dialect not only taught themselves how to use a graphical user interface and how to navigate a computer, but in doing so, they also taught themselves English. And when Mitra met with them, the students complained to Mitra, that he had given them a device that only speaks English, so they had to learn English. And they learned it outside the system, and they learned outside of the normal ways that we are told that we advance as thinkers. And that approach is much more of an arts-based research approach. And I believe the instilling into the scientific inquiry the ability also to believe that we can imagine and not necessarily have to prove, that we can explore and not necessarily have an end result, is another kind of basic research that science often does, but more and more through the necessity of funding and corporatization, experimentation often does not allow, but it often allows that in the arts. Perhaps some of you have seen what is the most widely watched TED Talk of all time. Ken Robinson's Are Schools Killing Creativity? The most watched TED Talk of all time. We're approaching it, as of today, approaching 66 million views. What Robinson asks is, why do we teach math every day but not dance? Why are the arts delegated to a lesser sense of importance? Robinson correctly points out that we now know that intelligence exists in many, many different ways. There is analytical intelligence, the ability to computate, the ability to prescribe algorithmic functions to things. There is also athletic intelligence. Now, I'm not much of a sports fan, but I totally understand that the ability to run across a basketball court and in real time calculate the distance, trajectory, necessary angle, and speed of an object you are about to propel into a hoop is a kind of intelligence I do not possess, and dare I say, many of us do not possess. The ability to understand your body in space, the ability to create sound in ways that is not only functional, but pleasing, the ability to tell a story. These are intelligences that I feel more and more must be fully integrated at the outset of any scientific inquiry. We face a world where some of us live in a country where, unfortunately, all too many of our citizenry do not believe in science. They do not trust science. They think there's an intrinsic evil, some conspiratorial malevolence. And they believe that because they've been told stories. We need to counter with equally powerful and equally effective stories in order for science to regain, at least in the country I sit in, regain its rightful place as the arbiter of fact-finding, the place of inquiry where understanding is welcome and knowledge is expanding at all times. And the knowledge that we perhaps will never get it right, but we will get it better. That is a kind of augmentation that I believe the transhumanism and the Humanity Plus movement does well. It can tell that story. It can say why it is important that people have the option to enhance themselves biomechanically and enhance themselves aesthetically equally well. Because for me, I believe a life that is 1,000 years long is not worth living without Shakespeare. It is not worth living without the Ramones. It is not worth living without all of the various ways of expression that are done in the arts-based practices. Now, I'm a person who makes his living by making images. Yet, as you see, I'm not sharing any with you. That is absolutely purposeful because I want you to fill in the pictures of what I'm saying. I want you to imagine Mitra's hole in the wall. I want you to imagine what it was like to punch a hole, stick a computer in, somehow wire it up, get it functioning, and just leave it there. And I want you to imagine what it was like the next morning when children stumbled upon it. And perhaps for several hours, it made no sense. It might as have been an alien spacecraft. It might as well have been reverse engineered technology from beta reticulans, if that's what you believe. Or it might have just been that, as Ferlinghetti says, that rebirth of wonder happened in them without being taught, without knowing what they were doing, that sense of experimentation that scientists take for granted and artists equally take for granted, instilled in children. In Robinson's TED Talk, he points out that Picasso said, all children are born artists. Robinson then says, and then we're taught how to not be artists. I would say that we will have better scientists. We will have augmented scientists when they are artists as well. And we will have better artists, augmented artists, when they are scientists as well. Perhaps the other end of the creative continuum won't be their forte. Perhaps a modern dancer will not often be a brilliant quantum physicist, but the more modern dancers understand quantum physics, the more their work will express that. And likewise, the more that physicists understand what it is to inhabit the body in 3 dimensions and to be able to express cohesive ideas, both discrete and abstract, the more quantum entanglement may perhaps be something more people can understand, at least at the fundamental level. And I say that as someone who collaborated with quantum physicists and modern dancers and created live multimedia pieces in which dance tried to express what quantum entanglement is. Is it the same as sitting in a classroom at MIT? Of course not. Is it the same even as watching a Khan Academy course on physics? Of course not. But to get people to watch a Khan Academy course and maybe perhaps work rigorously hard and strive and maybe someday sit either physically or virtually at a class at MIT, perhaps one of the entrees in will be through the arts as much as through the technologies. When I first heard about Mitra's hole in the wall, I thought about something that I think Natasha will appreciate. I thought about a piece that happened decades before his called Hole in Space by 2 artists named Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz. All of us sitting in this virtual space, what I call a digital campfire, sitting around telling stories over a digital campfire, we really owe an acknowledgement to Sherry Rabinowitz and Kit Galloway, a name some of you may know, but I suspect far too few do. Kit and Sherry, originally working under their own names and then working under a name, Electronic Cafe International, created some of the first experiments in telecommunication arts, very crude by today's Zoom standards, but really the essence, the philosophical, the technological, and the aesthetic essence of what we are all doing today, sitting around this digital campfire, was done in the late 70s, early 80s, and full blown out in early 90s by Electronic Cafe International. Now, at that point, very few people either had computers or had robust internet connections to be able to do this at home. So they had what later became known as internet cafes. But they had art spaces where people came and sat around networked computers, hooked up to Antarctica, hooked up to the Vatican, hooked up to every major city in the world. And they conducted what they called art pieces, but what we would now just call communicating via Zoom. They did it, of course, with absolute collaboration with scientists at every step of the game. They would fully acknowledge that. Some of those were JPL scientists, some of those were UCLA scientists, scientists from all over the world, pooled their knowledge together and cobbled together the kind of crude tools that little by little got better and better to the point where today it's a free piece of software that we can download on our computer. Now, for me, the notion of art has to understand that it cannot go forward without science. And I plead with scientists to open your door to artists, because artists have ideas that perhaps can express what you're doing in different ways, but also perhaps inspire you. We all know about the history of Xerox PARC and how the GUI developed there, and basically desktop computing as we know it was developed there. But perhaps not enough of us know that they had artists in residence working with them. One of the first, perhaps the first, was an artist named David M. And David not only was an artist in residence there, but then later went to the Jet Propulsion Lab and banged on their door and became their first artist in residence. And by David's desire to create images on computers at a time when computers were monochromatic, either amber screened or green screened and just text-based, David inspired people. He worked closely with MacArthur fellow James Blinn, a computer scientist, and together they imagined that computers could do more than text, that computers could not only make simple images, but can make the images we take for granted, the images that at first NASA used to create flight simulations, but then later every branch of knowledge, including the arts, used to create everything from major motion pictures to the PowerPoint demos that we see today, to, yes, to the MRI, to all of the kinds of VR that are used by both science and art, by every kind of augmented reality. Imaging was at its core. The need for the image to be an integral part of communication. Imagine scientific data being communicated without imaging. Imagine the world without the Hubble. The images that were given to us are computer images. They are accurate in the sense that they are capturing parts of the visible spectrum and the various other aspects of the electromagnetic spectrum that science now sees goes beyond our human seeing, but it's imaging. And so for me, I'm going to wrap this and say that there was a power failure today in Santa Monica. My laboratory is in Santa Monica in the 18th Street Arts Center, just a very short parking lot distance from where Electronic Cafe did many of its experiments. I was going to give this presentation from the 18th Street Arts Center, but because too many people had air conditioners on in this hot day in Los Angeles, the power went out. So I jumped in the car, drove 15 miles to my home, and I'm doing this from a small laptop. I can still do it. I am not doing it with the imaging that I perhaps might have given you, but I was still able to share this digital campfire story with you. And we are creating at 18th Street a streaming laboratory. Sherry Rabinovitz left us far too young, and we are going to name the streaming laboratory in her honor. And we're working with some scientists. And if there are any scientists out there who want to play in our playground around our digital campfire, you are most welcome. And your thoughts and your expressions and even your disagreements with us are beyond welcome, because art cannot exist without science. And we believe that science cannot exist without art. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michael. A very inspiring talk. There's a lot of not debate, but discussion, and in the community, and everyone is so appreciative. We all want more of it. So if it was for us, we would have liked to talk for 20 more minutes. So thanks a lot for your talk. A question that I'm getting from the chat, for example. Can you address issues of artists opening up their entire lives as art on the internet today as it relates to transhumanism?
Yes. For me, any art that is on the internet is by definition transhumanist art. It is art that utilizes a great deal of the intrinsic philosophies that Max More and Natasha and Ray Kurzweil and dozens of you have articulated in many ways, not always agreeing perhaps, but to me, when we talk about digital art, I do not believe printing out a digital image on a piece of paper, sticking it on a frame and sticking it in an art gallery. I think it ceases to be digital art when it gets printed. I believe that the art on the internet, which is for me at its best when it is interactive, when it is malleable in some way by audience, when it is augmentable, when it varies over time. These are, to me, are transhumanist arts in that they are art that could not have been done without the internet. Even if they could have been done on an offline computer, once they go online, the ability for the viewer to become co-creator, co-collaborator, co-manipulator, that to me is transhumanist art. And I know Natasha was experimenting with things like that early on. Electronic Cafe, as I mentioned, certainly were. The art group I'm part of, EZTV, is definitely doing that for decades. And that's, to me, I think the promise of where art and science is going to play at its best. Online, non-location based, non-linearly, and hopefully non-hierarchically.
The next question comes from Natasha herself. She's asking, how can we engage more artists to forego the Van Gogh sentiment that one needs to be deaf to be recognized and implement the view that life is art and its canvas has no time frame?
Wow, beautiful question. I don't believe in any field, whether it's classical art, whether it's transhumanist art, or whether it's transhumanism in general, are we going to take everyone along for the ride? There are going to be people that don't want to get on the bus. I say that's their right. But I have always found there are enough people who are eager to jump on board that there is no shortage. When I was referencing Ken Robinson's story about our schools killing creativity and Mitra's hole in the wall, I'm inspired by the fact that I believe people seek out like-mindedness and they seek out those things they yearn for. It's our job to try to encourage others and to inform in those as best we can. But I also believe by dropping crumbs around online, people will find it. And I do believe a lot of this will develop virally and not necessarily by being prodded. And for me, I see no lack of young people eager to discover this stuff.
So the internet can actually be instrumental to the spread of online art. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the greatest transhumanist augmentation so far is the internet. That look at what we are all doing. I am looking at a piece of glass. That's all I'm doing. I'm looking at a piece of glass. However, somehow we have all been augmented that no matter where you are in the world, we're communicating. This is transhumanism in its, I believe, most developed form so far, in that we can network. We can, what 50 years ago people might think is some sort of satanic black magic, that we're doing this teleportation, telepathy thing. This is now a given. This is humanity plus. We are doing far beyond what our bodies were born doing. And it's all through this amazing marriage of science and the arts.
A friend of mine who's actually studying his PhD at the Centre Pompidou, he came out with a little device that allows anyone to turn any surface into a musical instrument, and now he's turning any surface into a control device. So that is an example of how technology can help merging the human body to create more art and express people and help people expressing in artistic ways.
Absolutely. That's a 21st century example. The Stradivarius is a Renaissance example.
Yeah.
Every musical instrument other than the human voice is an augmentation. I've often said that the only music that is not augmented is a cappella singing done without a microphone. The only dance that is not augmented is done out on a field barefoot, not on a stage and not wearing toe shoes. That art has been, as all branches of human endeavor, tools are the augmentations of their time and their era. The hammer, now replaced with the screw drill, are augmentations of banging something with your fist. Every tool, whether it's a scientist's tool, a journeyman's tool, an accountant's tool, a lawyer's tool, or an artist's tool, is an augmentation.
I'm going to take one last question from the community, which is more of a curiosity than an actual question. And David is asking, as examples of arts influencing public understanding in a healthy, positive way about future possibilities, what films or TV series most impressed you?
I'm not a big fan of the way that Hollywood has portrayed science in general, let alone this field. I've often talked about what I call the Frankenstein syndrome, where because Aristotle said a very, very long time ago in Poetics that a story isn't compelling unless it has conflict, and people to this day treat that as an unquestionable fact. Things have to go wrong in storytelling. So scientists have to have either a fatal flaw or they have to make some terrible mistake, and then they release this flu to the world, as so many people think COVID is a mad scientist's invention. I haven't seen yet a neutral, let alone really positive conveyance of what this field is. I would be really interested from the community to hear suggestions, because I've basically turned off from watching what Hollywood thinks you do, or what Hollywood thinks you want to do, or what Hollywood thinks you're going to be doing in 10 years. I've stopped watching them. I hope they do a better job, and I hope I'm wrong.
Michael, unfortunately, we have to wrap up this talk, and we have to introduce the next panel. It was a great pleasure having you in. I think we all loved your talk, and please let us know where we can find more and follow more of your talks or read more about you or from you.
Thank you.